Good afternoon. My name is Brad Reeves, and I welcome you and all to help build America's future. Mr. Dave McCormick will need no introduction to most folks listening, but in case you haven't heard of him, let me lay out some bullet points. Dave is a seventh-generation Pennsylvanian. He wrestled in high school for Bloomsburg, and we love wrestling here in northeastern Pennsylvania. He also wrestled for Army while at West Point and was runner-up at 167 pounds for 2 years in a row, and that is no mean feat. Rangers lead the way. Dave went airborne with the storied 82nd Airborne Division and was the executive officer of a combat engineering company that cleared minefields during the first Gulf War. He was awarded the Bronze Star for his service and retired from the Army as a captain. Now let's get to the boring parts. Dave earned his doctorate in international relations at Princeton and has an honorary degree from Dickinson. Afterwards, Dave became CEO of Free Markets, a software and services company. He then was confirmed to be the Undersecretary of Commerce for Industry and Security in the Bush 43 administration, and later the Undersecretary of the Treasury for International Affairs. If that wasn't enough, Dave then joined Bridgewater Associates, a hedge fund, as president, and later he became the CEO. Obviously, Dave is a guy with boundless energy and determination. Now, a little bit of the Ronco story. The published program for this event is off a bit. I've worked for Ronco since 1982, but president only since 2013. Mr. McCormick is a seventh-generation Pennsylvanian. I'm a sixth-generation Pennsylvanian. I can't find who Sylvester Reeves' father was, my fifth great-grandfather. I worked various jobs and attended several schools, including Johnson School of Technology, before being hired by Ronco on September 8, 1992. Johnson School of Technology here in Lackawanna County is and was a great place to get a technical education. In the early days, Ronco Machine built some new machinery, but for the most part, rebuilt and upgraded older American paper converting machinery. We worked mostly in the paper industry, and rebuilding was a very common solution with many companies, both very large and small. We produced our first very successful paper tube winder, like the one to the right of me, in the mid-90s, and have built 150 machines since. We sold these winders and many other pieces of machinery throughout the Western Hemisphere. We sold some in Europe, but it is difficult to compete many time zones from home. We had satellite branches in Brazil, Mexico, and England for a time, but they're all gone. Mostly because protectionary tariffs made our machinery too expensive, even if it was superior to the competition. In the early 2000s, that competition was from European manufacturers. American companies that built paper machinery stopped innovating and shifted work offshore. But our paper tube winders were so good that certain Fortune 500 companies replaced the European tube winders, bought in a package of all new equipment, and they took these new tube winders, European tube winders, and put them right in the scrap hopper. Chinese paper machinery at the time was being purchased by the type of companies that are only interested in price. American businesses that survived in supplying all the little things, such as springs, bearings, chains, gearboxes, disappeared because machine manufacturers disappeared. Fast forward to 2024. The Chinese equipment is getting much better. They produce clones of the machinery produced in Europe at a much lower cost and are good at it. The Chinese will soon dominate the paper machinery market as well if we, the people, continue to put people in Washington that care about the entire globe with the exception of the United States. Ronco produces state-of-the-art paper tube winders, and we are blessed that there are some American corporations that buy American quality and American workmanship. I believe that Mr. McCormick, Dave, will do his best to build America's and Pennsylvania's future. Mr. McCormick.
Thank you, Brad, so much, and thank you to Ronco for hosting what's a really important discussion, really about the future of our Commonwealth, the future of the country. Thanks also to Building America's Future for hosting this really important discussion. And I've tried over the last few months to begin to create a conversation about what I think is probably the biggest challenge, or one of the biggest challenges to America in our lifetimes, which is the challenge and threat from China. Both the economic threat from China's rise, China's techno-authoritarian model, but also the geopolitical threat and the military threat that comes with China's rise on the global stage and China's technological superiority in many ways. So, to really understand where to go, we got to start with a brief discussion of how we got here. And we got here because American political and business leaders made a fundamental miscalculation some 20 plus years ago, that they believed that by bringing China into the global trading regime, into the global trading system, a number of different things would happen. China would grow, and both U.S. economy and the world economy and China's economy would all prosper. That's happened to some degree. But they also believed that China over time would open up its markets and adapt free trading principles. It's welcome into the World Trade Organization and most favored nation status was predicated on a set of rules in protecting intellectual property, rules in ensuring that you had open market access for U.S. companies to sell into China, and that there wouldn't be subsidies that would make America's products uncompetitive because of the lack of fair trade. There was also a hope that this would make China more passive in terms of not taking on a much more adversarial approach to America, and that this would lead to a safer world. That didn't happen. That was a miscalculation. While there were a number of benefits that came with the opening, China never adopted those rules. China has maintained unfair trade practices. China has been the largest thief of intellectual property. Probably the largest thievery in the history of the world is the intellectual property that's been sold. China's not played by the rules. They've tried to weaponize our dependence on China. We saw it during COVID with the supply chains, with pharmaceuticals. We saw it during COVID with our dependence on semiconductors from outside the United States. Most of the semiconductors are manufactured in Taiwan, a mere 90 miles from mainland China. So the deal hasn't worked in the way that we hoped it would work. And so as I'm running for the Senate, and as you mentioned, I grew up in Bloomsburg, not far from here, probably 40, 50 miles from here, playing football and wrestling in towns like Shikellamy and Shikshini and North Schuylkill. So this is home for me. And I've seen what's happened over the last 20 or 30 years as a consequence of these policies. With that in mind, I thought it was very important as your future U.S. Senator to lay out a vision of what U.S.-China relations should look like and the kind of policies that you can count on me to advocate if I'm elected senator. And I laid out a speech with 6 key bands that we should put in place to create better balance, less dependence, and a more aggressive posture to China. And just briefly, those 6 bands are, first and foremost, stop the unabated flow of Chinese fentanyl into the United States. The fentanyl crisis is killing people all over Pennsylvania and all over the United States. Revoke China's permanent normal trade relations, and also advocate for China's removal from the WTO. We can't do that alone, but that's a position I'll take. We're going to get into that in some detail. 3, stop making America more dependent on China, as we are right now with lithium batteries and solar panels. So all this Biden administration legislation and policy that Bob Casey supported is essentially creating a new dependency. We're now dependent on China for lithium batteries and solar panels. We got to stop that. Fourth, end the investment or trade with China that supports the growth of the Chinese military complex and the Communist Party. We have investors right now, companies investing in China directly in helping China's military, which will be our biggest adversary in the world if things go in a terrible direction. Remove China from the World Health Organization. We still don't know what the heck happened with COVID, right? We haven't gotten to the bottom of things with COVID. China unleashed on the world this horrible scourge of COVID. I'm not saying it was intentional, but to ensure that never happens again, you have to get to the core of how it happened in the first place. China's blocked us every step of the way, and the World Health Organization has been its puppet. And finally, as a farmer that's got a big farm in Columbia County, stop the strategic purchase of farmland by China across the United States. China's buying millions of acres of farmland. So that is my China agenda, how I think U.S.-China relations, and I've called on Bob Casey and President Biden to enact these 6 bans because I think they're what's good for America. Today's discussion gets to the point that you brought up, which is that the trade relations and the fact that the stealing of intellectual property, the fact that unfair trade practices with China, and the fact that we become very dependent on our supply chains in China puts us at a huge disadvantage. And so let me talk briefly about revoking permanent normal trade relations and removal from WTO. China's rise, its economic rise, was fueled by the loss of millions of American jobs, including more than 220,000 manufacturing jobs in Pennsylvania alone because of unfair trade practices. And my view is I would put my bet on the American manufacturer anytime as long as it's a fair playing field. As long as I think Pennsylvanians and Americans like to compete, but if you want to compete, it's got to be on a fair trading line. For 2 decades, under the leadership of President Obama, President Biden, Senator Casey, communities across our Commonwealth were hollowed out. So I grew up in Bloomsburg. When I was a kid in high school, it was a McGee carpet mill. Remember the McGee carpet mill? 2,000 folks worked in the McGee carpet mill. When I went back to Bloomsburg in the last couple weeks, there's 200 there today. This is all a consequence of a hollowing out. And a big part of this is that China has not adhered to the conditions that were placed on them to get access to the World Trading Organization and WTO status and to get permanent normal trade relations. That gave them a preferential trading relationship with America that was predicated on them following the rules. They haven't followed the rules. They've imposed significant restrictions on investment into China and capital flows out of the country in a way America's does not. And our failure, the failure of leadership across both parties over 20 years to hold China accountable, to hold the Communist Party accountable, has resulted in that big disadvantage that I mentioned. So it's time to revoke WTO status, revoke PNTR, and those actions are the only way to create the incentive to get China to play by the rules. And so that's the first big thing that I think we should do. Second, and I mentioned this earlier, but just to step back, we cannot have American companies and American investors investing in China in a way that's directly contributing to China's rise in its military against America. Let me give you an example. In the Silicon Valley today, there are companies investing in artificial intelligence companies in China that do business directly with the PLA, the Chinese People's Liberation Army, the Chinese Communist Party. We can't have that. It's crazy that we're financing our own potential adversary and enemy. So we have to stop and put restrictions on any trade or investment in the national security state. It's unconscionable to consider that U.S. dollars could ultimately be funding our potential enemy. And make no mistake about it, 4 or 5 years ago, President Xi gave a speech where he laid out his vision that China would be a techno-authoritarian power and that in the most important technologies in the world, China would be the leader, not America. That's the vision we're competing in against. We can't help invest in and underwrite that vision. Finally, we learned a valuable lesson during COVID. We learned lots of lessons during COVID, but we learned a valuable lesson, which is we were way more dependent on the world and certainly way more dependent on China than we realized on critical areas of trade. Pharmaceuticals is the best example. You know when you couldn't get any pharmaceuticals during COVID? That was because the pharmaceutical supply chains in China weren't delivering. Semiconductors, you couldn't buy a pickup. There was a waiting period of 12 months for a pickup. That was because of semiconductors manufactured outside of the United States were stopped during COVID, and our entire economy almost came to a grinding halt. That is an intolerable situation. And so my plan has laid out a vision that for critical industries, we have to bring those industries home or have them only in the countries that are our closest allies in the world. So hopefully that's a good conversation starter for what I think is going to be a very valuable roundtable. And to put my cards on the table up front, my goal is to hear from you and learn on ways that China is affecting you, things that you would be thinking of if you were in my shoes and were hoping to represent the great people of Pennsylvania. I want to be a strong advocate for the kinds of jobs that you have here and the kinds of industries that are critical to Pennsylvania's future.
Excellent. Thank you, Dave. I'd like to have everyone at the table introduce themselves briefly, starting with Patrick Perry over here.
Sure. Excuse me. I'm Pat Perry from Black Birch Engineering, and Black Birch Engineering is an automation and control supplier. We do automation systems for OEMs like Ronco machine. We've done a lot of work with Ronco and other companies, municipal, oil and gas, anything on that line.
Great.
Alberto Paramo Landscaping, Paramo Realty, Paramo Facility Management Company. Service Northeast Pennsylvania, landscape and design, and we maintain residential and commercial clients such as Johnson, Cinemark, large corporate scale clients. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Alex Grover. I'm president of I2M. We're a manufacturer based in Mountaintop, Pennsylvania, of flexible polymer films and leading plastics recycler in the area as well.
Excuse me, my name's Russ Canfield. I'm an employee of Ronco for the last 12 years. Enjoy working here very much.
This is me. I'm Chris Shermack, Lackawanna County Commissioner. I'm proud to say I'm the Republican Commissioner here in Lackawanna County. So very interested to hear what everyone has to say today.
My name is Gary Zeiss. I'm an employee of Ronco Machine for 25 years. I worked in the paper industry for 53. I'm 77 years old, probably the oldest one in the room. And I'd like to thank you very much for coming.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Jim Zara. I work for Kaharchik Construction. We do high power work, traffic control, traffic signals, street lighting. I'm an electrical engineer and a graduate of Johnson School of Technology back in the old days with a degree in biomedical technology. But, I'm happy to be here. Thank you for your service to the country, and I'm looking forward to it today.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Mark Sikowski. I work for Midway Industrial Supply. We're an industrial distribution house selling critical machinery components, bearings of all sorts, power transmission equipment, motors, gearboxes, sprockets, etc. Parts, and a business and parts that are dependent on original equipment manufacturers such as Ronco, who I've had the pleasure of dealing with for over 30 years. We're also dependent on manufacturing, keeping machines running. And unfortunately, that sector is just dwindling and dwindling. All we have coming into the area, it seems, are distribution warehouses. We need industry, we need manufacturing, and we need to diversify. I certainly agree with Dave's points of address the critical products that we need and not stand for log jams at the ports. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone, for your introductions. Dave, our host and Building America's Future, brought us together today to discuss China and how unfair trade practices impact American manufacturing, small businesses, our Commonwealth, and our very country, and specifically how we, the United States, should approach China when it comes to international trade, how we reduce our dependence on China and end American investment that supports the Chinese Communist Party, the CCP, and the security state that is today's People's Republic of China. So, first question for Mr. McCormick. Why should Congress revoke China's permanent normal trade relations?
Yeah, well, thanks for that question. The thing I want to start by saying is because it's it's important to lay out as a senator what my views will be, but also I think it's important to have a real conversation about the value of fair trade, not free trade, but fair trade. And I think that's in that distinction between free and fair is the answer to your question. So the hope with the WTO and PNTR was that by trading with China, we would benefit our economy, benefit consumers in the United States, benefit U.S. businesses who could trade around the world. And so as a result of that, what really has happened is that many goods that are manufactured around the world are bought by U.S. consumers that are cheaper because they're built in China. So when you go to Walmart, 30% of what you're buying is made in China. The problem with what happened is the rules weren't fair. And so, as you said, China copies machines. They steal the intellectual property, and therefore they have a competitive advantage. You're inventing, and they're stealing the invention, and then being able to manufacture based on someone else's intellectual property. Or they're not opening up to U.S. markets, or they're subsidizing their steel, as an example. So it's not competitive, or so U.S. steel is not competitive. So they haven't followed the rules. And so there's been lots of political leaders who have shaken their fist and said, follow the rules, and they haven't followed the rules. Now, President Trump took the most active posture of anybody that's been president and put tariffs in place as a starting point. But what I'm saying with the revoking of PNTR, which is essentially saying we gave you a special access, we gave you special opportunity with America, I'm saying that we should revoke that because they haven't lived up to their part of the deal. And that won't be an easy thing to do, by the way. That'll be disruptive economically. So if there was somebody here arguing the other side of it, they'd say, well, we've got a big trading relationship with China. If we change the rules, that's going to be disruptive. It is going to be disruptive. But the only way to get that economic relationship in a place where it's fundamentally fair to U.S. manufacturers, fundamentally fair to U.S. labor, is to make sure it's the same playing field. And that's why I believe that we should take this step, which is a significant step. But I think we've tried to get China to play by the rules, and they haven't done so. Nope. The other reason I think we need to do this is that in these most critical industries, we've now learned that China has gone from being a competitor to an adversary. And that means that if there's critical industries that are being manufactured in China, wait a second, if we get into some sort of conflict with China, these most critical things, they're certainly not going to send them to somebody they're in conflict with. So the other thing we've learned is the relationship with China has become more and more combative since President Xi became president, because he has a vision of there's certain things that we just can't take the risk of having in the hands of China. That's the second reason I think we need to pull back on PNTR status and revoke. As again, the WTO, America alone can't revoke China's involvement in that, but I think America should lead that push to do so. And if China turned around tomorrow and started to play by the rules, I'd reconsider that. But they haven't done that, and that's why we need to take drastic action.
One belt, one road.
That's it. One Belt, One Road is the exact conflict with free and fair trade, which they promised.
Okay, I'd like to ask if anyone has a question to start with before I start picking people.
I'll try one.
Okay.
A few years back, I bought a new car. And I bought a Buick. You know, it was made in China.
Right.
I didn't know it when I bought it.
Yeah.
But how do we convince the manufacturers to stop sending the jobs over there? I mean, that's their part too.
Yeah. Well, listen, it cuts both ways. it cuts both ways, because if you bought a new Toyota right now, it would be manufactured in South Carolina. So,
Okay.
yeah, so this cuts both ways. My view on this, and it's really important, that America in general has been the beneficiary of fair trade when fair trade existed. So a world which trades, I believe, is in America's best interest. And the reason I believe that is because America has the most competitive products in the world. We have the best workers in the world. We have the most innovation in the world. So we have a great advantage by being able to sell all the special things that are made in America around the world, everything from natural gas to dairy products in, Susquehanna County. So a world that trades, in my opinion, is a world that's good for America. The problem is, it's got to be fair. It's got to be fair. And the problem with China and other countries around the world is we haven't been getting a fair deal. Other countries subsidize. Other countries impose tariffs. America and leaders in both parties, but particularly Republican parties, have been free trade advocates to the point of almost ideology and saying, even if it's not a fair deal, it's still in America's interest. I don't believe that's true. It's been against America's interest to allow trading that's not based on fair rules. The other thing we lost sight of is that this can be incredibly disruptive to communities. How do you put a price on a community that had 2,000 jobs like mine that went to 200 jobs? And what does that mean for the opportunity and the ability to get kids to stay and have futures? And how does it work for people that lose their jobs and then are dependents on others? This is a huge disruptive social thing. So I'm for fair trade. I think we need to be strong advocates of it. And what's most clear is our relationship with China has been the least fair of all. And that's why I believe we should take such a strong position.
Dave, I really like what you said about if the playing field is level, that U.S. manufacturers will win. I couldn't agree more. And so part of the challenge that I see is some of the regulations at home create a even increasingly unfair playing field. So as you think about, a strategy to approach that, how do you level that? How do you make it fair? And how do you create a pro-manufacturing environment here in the United States?
Yeah, it's such a good question. And, I've been traveling across our Commonwealth for the last couple of years, but in the last 4 months since I announced my campaign, it's every day I'm meeting with manufacturers and business owners and so forth, dairy farmers, cattle farmers, you name it. And I ask them all the same question. I say, what are the things that are standing in the way of growing and your business becoming more successful? It's the same three, no matter what industry it is. It's inflation, not in this order necessarily, the same three though. Inflation, skilled labor, and regulations. Regulations. And think about it. We have regulatory agencies in the Commonwealth, at the county level, at the national level, and the people wake up every morning saying, what new regulation do I need to create additional safety or whatever the regulatory goal is? There's not anybody behind the scenes saying, well, what regulations need to go away, right? Or is the cost benefit on that regulation really make sense? And the stories I've heard from steel mills to dairy farms on how oppressive the regulations are beyond control. The fracking industry, which is one I've spent a lot of time on because we're the 5th largest reserves of natural gas in the world, the regulations on pipelines and pipeline permitting is so over the top that our ability to unlock the unbelievable bounty of natural gas in Pennsylvania, which, by the way, is great for geopolitics and our security, great for our economy, but it's great for the environment too. The irony is that we cannot unlock this because of regulations. So, huge issue. So the first thing we have a problem is we have a guy in Bob Casey who's never been in business, never made payroll. He's never had to worry about any of these things. So all he sees is the role of government in forgiving student loans, the role of government in new programs to dole out money to people, the role of government in terms of regulating. He doesn't understand that the goose that laid the golden egg are you guys that create businesses and jobs and vibrant economies, right? The government doesn't fix it, private sector does. So the first thing we need to do is replace him with somebody who actually understands business. I've had to make payroll. I've gotten kicked in the head multiple times as a CEO of 2 different businesses. This is hard, and you need the government to not be in your way as an obstacle. The second thing we need to do is have a regulatory framework which actually is constantly evaluating how to optimize regulations and so they don't become anti-business. And President Trump, in his first administration, had an idea which he implemented, which is the 2-to-1 rule, which you probably heard. For every new regulation you put in place, you have to get rid of 2. That sounded pretty clever to me.
Yeah.
It's a basic mindset. There's some other ideas that people have proposed to me about creating potentially some fast-track independent review, which is in 90 days, a regulation gets reviewed, and if it isn't merited as a necessity, it can be done away with. Now it's years of litigation, and no business leader can do it. This is the role of your senator. So just to make sure everybody understands, there's 3 branches of government: an executive branch, a judicial branch, and a legislative branch. The legislative branch exists to hold the executive branch accountable. So the EPA or the Interior Department or the regulators of the oil and gas industry, they are held accountable by Congress. So as the senator from Pennsylvania, I'll be someone who can push on those every day. Why does that regulation make sense? Why is that in the best interest of Pennsylvanians? So I promise you that this is something that's very clear to me as a major deal for business leaders, and something I think I can have a big voice on as Pennsylvania senator.
Excellent. Anyone else?
Yeah, I have a question here. Now, in the landscape and construction and excavating and cleaning, I would say, and facility management, there's a lot of parts that you have to order. Everything says either made in China,
Yeah.
made in Taiwan. I rarely see anymore when I do order a variety of pallets of parts, made in USA. Now, the chain of events, if you want to picture the pyramid of China, is that their parts are more expensive to ship now, and the wholesaler charges more. I pay more. The labor cost is more for them to install. Now I have to charge my client more for services. How do we begin to reduce the effect of increased pricing on any sort of parts for heavy equipment, machinery,
Yeah.
trucks, parts, like you said, the parts for the trucks? We had a long issue for that as well. That stops my growth on scale. We got paused for a long time, but now we're revving back up, thankfully. Now, do we have a short-term and a long-term idea of that?
Yeah, I mean, I think a couple things. One, I mean, the primary driver of many businesses not being as competitive today is inflation. I just want to spend a minute on that because it's an issue all over the place. And what the Biden administration is saying, and what Senator Casey has said many times, is the problem is greedflation. The problem is business people like you are marking up products because you can. And I don't believe that's true. I'm sure there's somebody somewhere that's marking up a product more than they need to. But what I think is happening is that inflation, the basic inputs, fuel, labor, rent, are going up. And the reason they've gone up, and we know that for a fact, they were up 17% cumulatively over the last 3 years. The reason they've gone up is because such excessive government spending has created an enormous supply of money that's chasing purchases. And that's the primary driver of why many businesses have become less competitive. And so at the highest level, we need to run an economy that isn't over-indebted. We have $34 trillion of debt, $1 trillion of interest every year. We need to have an economy where we're not printing money that's driving up inflation. We need to have an economy that is fiscally solvent. In other words, where we can afford to pay our debt. That's a huge thing, but a senator can play a big role in that, and I'm happy to talk about that if you'd like me to. The second thing we need to do is make sure it's fair, because some of the parts that are coming into the United States are not fairly priced because they're subsidized. And so we need to have when we are operating, is what you said earlier, when we're operating in a fair environment, America competes very well. I mean, the thing that I'm most struck by when I walk through most machine shops today is how incredibly automated they are. Like, we have incredibly sophisticated manufacturing here throughout our Commonwealth. And so if you think about the quality of our labor, the quality of our work environment, we will be competitive in most and many industries if we have a fair shake. And so the two things you could start with are, number one, making sure we're not inflationary environment and a strong economy, that it's growing, because that creates more demand for your products. And the second thing we can do is create a playing field that's fair, where you're competing against, if you're competing against overseas providers, you're competing on a fair basis. If those two conditions are in place, I'd bet hard on American businesses being able to succeed.
Yes, sir. Pat?
Yeah, I'm kind of on the same topic. What I see in automation and control, we do a lot of work with manufacturers that are putting in production lines where they buy all the equipment and we come in and we coordinate it. We do all the software and control to make an automated production line all run together and run coordinated, so you don't need a lot of people to run it. And what I'm seeing a lot of is manufacturers that are buying their own equipment, and they buy equipment like what you'd get from Ronco or a lot of other OEMs that we work with in the United States. They buy equipment from other countries that comes in, and the price that they're paying for that equipment, I couldn't buy the components that are in the control panel for that. I mean, it's drastically cheaper for some of that stuff. So you know that it's being subsidized at a level that's enormous.
Right.
And do you think that's what's the best way to combat that? Because it's such a deep discount that they're getting on that equipment.
Well, if it's from China, I mean, the big problem with China is that many of the companies you're competing against are state-owned.
That's
right. They're state-owned. So the cost of capital is zero for them, right? So if this guy wants to buy a new machine, he's got to pay a pretty significant cost of capital, where the state-owned enterprise, they're competing with you on an unfair basis. So that's exactly the kind of thing that you have to deal with, and you're able to deal with by revoking PNTR and WTO status, where you basically say, listen, if it's not a fair playing field, then you're going to put tariffs in place or take action to block products coming into the United States that aren't competitive, that aren't based on a fair playing field. And that's the kind of trade-off I think we're going to have to make.
And another thing that I've seen, and similar to that, I had a project a few years ago where I needed to make a printed circuit board and get it manufactured. I had the design complete, everything ready to go, and I thought, I'm going to do this not through China, because that's the easiest way to do it, is just send it to somebody in China. They'll make it for you and send it back to you. So I looked, and I found a company that was in Canada that was doing that, so I gave them the specs. They gave me a price. I bought 20 boards, and while I was working with them on making the boards, I figured out that this person that was at the other end that had a...
was China.
It was China.
Yeah.
They had set up an office in Canada, and what they were doing was making the parts in China and running it through a storefront that was in Canada.
Well, what's happening now is there's a big movement out of China for many manufacturers to Vietnam and Philippines and other places. But, I just want to make sure you all know where I'm coming from on this, because I think it's important that even if you don't agree with it, you sort of understand my perspective on this. I think America's been the beneficiary of trade. I think the American economy is vibrant because you can sell your products anywhere around the world. And if you're a manufacturer, you can buy components that might not be from China, they may be from Vietnam or Canada. That's net good, because if you're a competitive manufacturer, you can do this. And I'll tell you a funny story. I was in York in the last campaign, and I did a visit in one day, and I walked into the first machine shop, and the guy said that China's eating our lunch. it's unfair. You got to hammer China. You got to have a tough posture in China. I said, I hear you. And then I went next door, just 400 or 500 yards to the next place, and it was a place that fabricated parts for Harley Davidsons, and it was the rack that went on the back of the Harley Davidsons. The biggest market was China, and the guy said, "Whatever you do, don't screw up relationships with China because we're selling." So the China relationship cuts both ways. The thing that I'm trying to make sure that we have is a relationship that's based on fundamental fairness and where we're not at all dependent on China for the most significant things. And what's happening because of the conflict with China, there's a huge movement to other sources of manufacturing that can be great benefits to other companies. And again, I come to saying, I do not believe it's in America's best interest to close off our economy to the world. I think that would be terrible for all of you because it would jack up the prices of our goods and it would stop us from having access to global markets. So I think America being the most vibrant trading country in the world is critical. I just think we've been getting screwed, if you'll pardon my language, for a long time with unfair rules. And the biggest country in terms of the top of the list in terms of unfair practices has been China. And that's where we have to focus our efforts in getting a fair deal. American manufacturers get a fair deal, they're going to win most of the time.
Excellent. Jimmy?
There's another component to this that I believe is got to be at least looked at in a better way, and this AI that's out there right now.
Yeah.
And my problem with the AI is it's first generation try at this, and there's not a lot of data out on there, and it's always this one size try to fit all kind of thing. But where I'm going with this is if you go into deal with PP&L or UGI or any of those utility companies, the first thing you deal with is AI.
Yeah.
You're not talking to a person until somebody calls you back. You'll get them, and then you'll finally go through the process, and it asks you for this, this, and this.
Yeah.
But then when you finally get the person to come out to the site, it's already 8-9 weeks later, and you want to know the first thing that comes out of their mouth?
Yeah.
That part that we need is backordered for 16 weeks. It's over and over again, and that's the first person that used to come out for the utility company, not the last.
Well, I think, let me talk about AI in two different levels.
Okay.
I think maybe three levels. One is, I think we're at the edge. If you think about how artificial intelligence is going to change our lives and think that the level of change is going to be 100, we're at like 2. I mean, we are at the bottom of a huge mountain that's going to change our lives. Think about it like the PC. I was with the CEO of Microsoft recently, and I was asking him about it, and he said, it's bigger than the PC. It's going to affect you. Just think how much the personal computer has changed all of our lives. Think about what this shop would have looked like before computerization. It is fundamental. So it's going to change your lives in terms of who you're dealing with. When I was driving in today, I did a Microsoft search. It's called Copilot. It's the new AI engine. And I said, give me the pros and cons of PNTR. Revoking PNTR for America. Laid out 3 pages. Wow. I mean, wow. This is so scary on what this could be. So it's going to be fundamental. I'm most worried about the national security implications. Remember some of those sci-fi movies from 25 years ago? What was it? HAL, Odyssey, 2001. Oh, you're too young. You don't remember this. Look, she's looking at me like I'm ancient.
That movie's from 1968.
Right. This is crazy. Crazy what the risk could be in terms of artificial intelligence really directing how militaries fight, how we see our enemy, even losing control, having autonomous weapons that are making choices on targeting. I mean, this is really scary stuff. And the strategic thing at the source of artificial intelligence, the most important thing that I could say on this is that it's data. Data is what makes artificial intelligence run. It's the power. So if you think about in the 70s or 80s how oil was the most strategic asset a country could have, today it's data. So the Chinese have 1.4 billion people, and they have complete control of all the data because it's an authoritarian state. We have 350 million people and no control of the data. And so that is where the AI battle is going to play out in terms of how you should protect your data, how we should, as individuals, protect your data. Does anybody get worried when you order a pair of shoes, or order a pair of sneakers online, and then for the next 8 weeks, you get advertisements for new sneakers? It's because your data got sold. Each of us has lost control of our data. And at a national level, we don't have a strategy for managing our data. So I think it's a huge national security concern and issue, and it's something which we need to have really capable, smart people focused on it because it could be a big worry. The second thing that is worrisome about it is the way it could change our culture, because you now have deep fake and things like that. You know, you could do a video of you doing something you never did. Because of artificial intelligence, you can essentially create videos that look real. You can create text. You can create sources where the source of your information is very hard to get to the bottom to. And so in a world where most Americans no longer trust their institutions, they don't trust the government, they don't trust business, they don't trust their elected officials, they even are losing trust in the military. In that world, when you have all the misinformation you could have through social media and artificial intelligence, that's a scary world too. And so I'm really worried about it in terms of how it could pull apart the fabric of our society, but also how it could change our national security. And China is our #1 competitor in terms of artificial intelligence because it's using artificial intelligence in all its weapons and everything else. So you put your finger on something that's of great significance. I don't have the answers to it, but I know it's something we have to focus on.
Do you think the government will get involved in trying to regulate it?
They're starting to. And, I'm of two minds on that. That the old Ronald Reagan line about, the scariest words you could ever hear are, I'm from the government, I'm here to help you, right? So the idea of the government, a bunch of bureaucrats in Washington trying to regulate artificial intelligence does not seem like it's going to be an obvious solution. But the government potentially orchestrating some combination of private sector, military, government people to put the right regulatory framework in place, maybe. I mean, I've met many of these people that are the most, prominent people in AI. It's very hard to understand if you're not a very technical person. And so I think there's going to have to be leadership at the national level, but I don't think the government alone could begin to lay the groundwork. And, listen, we've done this before. We did this with nuclear weapons. We did this with other things. So there's a path to this, but we've got to have leadership that gets out in front of it. And frankly, the Biden administration and Secretary Austin at the Defense Department, this is not a team that I would put much confidence in.
Well, thanks, everyone. Dave, do you want to give some remarks?
Just closing remarks?
I believe so.
Yeah.
I think we were all so involved it went a little further. Okay.
Is that a nice way to say I talked too much?
Before we close,
yeah,
because I've been listening and I wanted to hear what people have to say. I came from a third generation family automobile dealership. And, early on, back in the mid-70s, late 70s, early 80s, we were thriving. And with businesses closing and manufacturing leaving, not only here, but throughout the United States, I've just watched that dwindle. So now, as my position as commissioner, what I'm concerned about is obviously health and human services. That's what we do, but also economic development. Right now, our biggest economic boost that we have is warehousing up and down Interstate 81 and beyond. So to create jobs and to boost our economy here, the last thing I heard, and this is a big push with Senator Casey, is the train coming to town from New York City. So, I'm not. I think it will be a boost somewhat in the economy a little bit, but also it's going to change the life that we know it here. It's going to bring just the the issues that are in New York City and beyond to our area here. So, I'm really hoping that once you get in, we can start working together to get manufacturing. I mean, this is a great area. Many of the other areas throughout Pennsylvania, we were booming here. We have talented people, Ronco people. I mean,
Yeah.
we have to promote that.
It's so true, because if you if you were like a Martian that landed and you just looked at Pennsylvania without knowing anything, you said proximity to the population of the United States. I think I saw the statistics. We're in something like within 6 hours of 60% of the population of America, right here in Pennsylvania, right? We've got world-class universities. We've got really great infrastructure. With the exception of pipeline for natural gas, we have great broadband, generally speaking, access to New York City and other places. We have a port. I mean, we have unbelievable natural blessings with natural resources. And the problem is getting out of our own way, because the blue state kind of regulatory oversight, the lack of a pro-growth economy. Like, if you took the kinds of policies that were put in place in South Carolina or Tennessee or Texas and were able to superimpose them on Pennsylvania, you'd have a vibrant economy, because we're so blessed with natural benefits. And so I don't pretend that if I was a senator overnight that can change,
Right.
but you have to have a vision for what that looks like to be able to promote the policies and understand why they make such a difference. So I couldn't agree more. I'm not sure, like, the train, maybe the train, I don't know the facts, the pros and cons, but there's so much about creating a robust, dynamic, pro-growth environment. And by the way, the fact that many jobs now have become more remote is incredibly advantageous to a place like Pennsylvania in this particular area, which is wonderful and beautiful, and people want to live here. So I think we've got a lot of assets that are really being underutilized. And as the senator from Pennsylvania, that would be, job one, is trying to create the kind of vibrant place where our kids want to stay.
Dave, just quickly, that proximity that you mentioned to so much of the United States and population, as I mentioned before, all it seems to be bringing us are
Is the bad.
tractor trailers coming into a warehouse and prime vans going out onto the roads
Yeah.
and distributing product. We need manufacturing.
Yeah.
Grasp some of these areas, AI production, pharmaceuticals, things that need to be critically made here in the United States.
Couldn't agree more. Yeah, it's both. Yeah, you're absolutely right. Yeah, those jobs are sticky.
We got to wrap up.
All right. Well, thank you. Thank you for your incredible hospitality. Thank you all for participating in a great discussion. As always, I learn from every one of these things, and I appreciate you all making time for it.
Thanks for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.